But anyway, yes. So that important and rewarding film over. Well, we move on to something that covers some similar ground, but from the point of view of a real story.
Yes, let's do that. With skins. Or skin, even. With skin.
Skins. Isn't that E4 program? That's quite different.
With skin.
In Ohio, in the United States, there's a group of individuals claiming to be of Norse descent and rather pathetically calling themselves Vikings. Though one doubts if they've ever bothered opening a book to see how their perception holds up to reality. They meet together in the Vinlanders Social Club, where they talk about paying dues and defending their heritage and a bunch of other, well, frankly pathetic crap. Sadly though, while they're no doubt pathetic, they are also exceptionally dangerous, spending much of their time harassing non-whites, persecuting immigrants, burning mosques and, not infrequently, simply assaulting and murdering those with a less pallid complexion. It's into this world that Israeli director Guy Navid's, based on a true story Skin, takes us, telling the tale of Brian Babs Widner. No, why Brian's called Babs is never explained, so don't ask me. Played by Jamie Bell, a once high-ranking member of this organised hate group, who left the group and transformed himself in a number of senses, undergoing a 1.5 years of painful tattoo removal to rid himself of the racist and violent markings he had applied to his face over the years. We learn that Brian was the product of an unhappy home, affected by violence and alcoholism, and that he was adopted by Vera Farmiga's Shireen, Farmiga again showing she can do a fine turn in odious characters, and Bill Camp's Fred Krager, leaders of the Vinlanders, and moulded into a soldier for their cause. As another young, vulnerable teen is recruited by Shireen and Fred in a similar fashion to Brian, he seems to question those beliefs and question his commitment to their cause, and to evaluate the psychic toll that perpetual hate is taking on him. The primary driver for his introspection, though, is meeting and falling in love with Danielle MacDonald's Julie and her 3 girls. Julie has a background related in many ways to Brian's, but has tried to distance herself from it, though one might question the wisdom of attaching herself to the neo-Nazi with a propensity for sudden and extreme violence to do so, even if in the first instance the violence is in her service. Well, if you squint at it, at least. The club aren't happy with Brian's departure, and he has to survive death threats and attempted murder before he can escape, with help from the FBI and anti-racism activist Darlyle Jenkins. There's a nice idea in Skin, one that I happen to believe, that no one is beyond redemption, and a pretty powerful performance from Jamie Bell, but there's not a lot of substance. It really is only skin deep. The occasional flash forward to the agony of Widner's tattoo removal is hardly subtle, though not inappropriate, but the film utterly fails to get to the heart of why Widner believed what he did and why he ceased to. Brian's redemption is well acted, but barely explained, and there's frustratingly little insight into a subculture that is becoming alarmingly less sub with each passing year. Natif, who wrote as well as directed, squanders his greatest tool, Darlyle Jenkins. A former extremist himself, this black man now devotes himself to turning white supremacists, trying to convert hatred into peace. By the film's conclusion, we see that Babs and Darlyle have become close friends, but we see nothing of how they got there, and that journey would have been the perfect opportunity for Babs' exploration of his beliefs and the unlearning of being a racist. There are moments of frustration too, caused by the film's turn into some rather cliched melodrama, and particularly that perpetual crutch of trying to engender sympathy and provoke emotion, the death of an animal, something that I really, really dislike. I don't want the animal to be harmed. The animal does not deserve to be harmed. But as his death follows in the wake of someone trying to murder a child, I could not give a shit. Bell in particular is great, but Skin needs depth.
Yeah, it sounds like we're pretty much on the same page with this. It is a slightly frustrating film, but I guess I still enjoyed it as much as you can say you can enjoy a film like this. But it's a really good performance from Jamie Bell, which really does paper over an awful lot of cracks in the rest of the film. I think in particular the way this had been explained, I think in some bullet recaps, is that each tattoo that Jamie Bell's character was getting removed would then kind of relate to an event in his past that would lead that was some kind of informed in his character, and that really was not the case at all. I thought that sounded like a really clever framing device, and I thought, oh, that sounds quite good, but it really isn't that at all.
Yeah, it's because they talk about Fred in particular talks about them earning their patches, by which he means a tattoo. Like if they do some action, some act of villainy, they get a tattoo for it. So it felt like it should have been framed like, right, here's this terrible thing that Jamie Bell did, and they got this tattoo after it. We'll remove it.
Yeah.
You could use it just like in general, or you could use it for very specific events.
Yeah.
And in the end, it's mostly an afterthought. It's like, because you see it, 3 times in the entire film?
Yeah, it's sort of mentioned or alluded to kind of briefly in the police interrogations that he gets, but I mean, it's not really anything. You could remove all that and it wouldn't make any real difference to the film at all. So it's certainly not as important as I kind of thought it would be, which is a real shame, because I think there's a lot of depth to Jamie Bell's character that could have been explored that is just simply not. As you say, I have no idea. Well, okay, you do get some idea of how he became indoctrinated into this, because that's the kind of whole point of the relationship between him and the new kid that's kind of brought in from the homeless kid. And you can kind of infer a lot from that, which is nice, but I still don't really know how he thought himself out of this trap, or how indeed he fell in love with his wife at the end of the day, because that just seems to just happen, and I'm expected to do it. It's just there doesn't seem to really be any huge amount of connection between them at that point. It's just almost as though the film's railroading you into seeing the connection between these characters that just doesn't really seem to be there. So there's an awful lot of depth to that character that just doesn't get touched upon, which is a real shame, because I think that could really elevate this film quite a lot. It does create something of a weakness at the heart of it, because at the end of the day, I couldn't really connect with this character. I don't know how he got to the place where he is, and I don't quite know how he got out of the place where he is. It's just something that happened in the context of the film. It doesn't really explain any of how that happened, and that seems like a real missed opportunity.
Yeah, there's no real inciting event of anything. There's not like, there's one moment where he's like, oh, what am I doing? Like, that he sees a certain person in a certain way, or he kind of becomes sick of it. It kind of just, it's like, oh no, I don't believe this anymore now. Well, okay, but why?
Yeah, that seems like a real shame, because there's not really an awful lot else to criticise in it. I think the rest of the film does a pretty good job of everything else that it's trying to do. It's quite well shot. Jamie Bell, as I've said, is really fantastic, and the supporting cast is pretty good too. I don't really have any complaints with the rest of the film. It's just the way that they've told the story of their central character has left me a little bit cold to it. And
or the way they haven't told the story.
Yes, exactly. That was the one thing that stopped me really making any real connection with it. But my attention did kind of wander a little bit towards the end of it, because I couldn't really get on board with either. Well, in particular, how this character became kind of deprogrammed, and I think you make a really good point with the lack of exploration as well into the kind of relationship between him and the deprogrammer that they've got, if nothing else. Again, another opportunity to really delve into the character that just, it doesn't do that. It fluffs it entirely. To be honest, I'm surprised given how badly, I think it's fair to say, I think how badly it's actually handled against main character. I was surprised that I was engaged with it at all. But I suppose that's perhaps a real testament to Jamie Bell's performance, which is really good. In any other circumstance, if this film had came out 10 years ago, I would have said that, yeah, okay, that's okay. It's an average film and probably doesn't really deserve all that much attention. It's just the climate we find ourselves in makes this kind of film more important to watch and to understand than anything else. So it's kind of gained an extra star just by virtue of the kind of times we find ourselves in, which is perhaps not the best way to view films, but well, that's part of being in society. So yeah,
I think I kind of think it loses a star for that actually because it's so important
Yes.
now. It's like it needs to have more in there.
Yeah.
It's not just like a general tale of redemption, of which there have been a number, and you'll occasionally see people doing a speaking tour. Somebody used to be a Grand Wizard of the KKK or something, and that, you know, I mean, it's good if people couldn't be reasoned out of these terrible beliefs. Then what is the point of anything?
Yeah.
So it's good that they exist, but it feels like that's exactly what this film's missing. It's like, okay, I get that he's a person who did these bad things. He stopped doing these bad things to become a better person. Good, but how?
Yeah.
It really needs the how and the why.
Yes, so in many ways, you could say the same thing about American History X, I suppose. So I suppose we did with Eddie Furlong's character, but it really does need a bit more depth into how he got himself out of that. Now, I don't know if maybe it's trying to get to the point where the only reason you get into this is because you're influenced by elders who should know better at points when you're very vulnerable, and that's how you get into it, and eventually you just kind of realise that you come out. That seems to be what both films were sort of saying, but that's not particularly satisfying or, I think, accurate
Or illuminating.
Yeah.
Or accurate. Yeah.
So I suppose you could apply the same criticism to both films, but it's certainly much more apparent in Skin than it is in American History X.
Yeah, American History X, it needs more of it. Skin almost needs any.
Yes, exactly, yes.
There's a real problem there. What I think it really needs is more of the relationship between Darlyle and Brian, because then you could really explore it. It's like he could be perhaps questioned why he believes these things, and if like Brian's then failing to come up with a coherent reason, then he starts like, oh right, okay, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And then it's just it's lacking really the substance. It just makes it frustrating more than anything, because it really needs it's because it's a compelling performance. It's an important topic. It needs more.
I suppose I still mostly recommend it. I still think it's worth looking at, but God, I just wish it had done a bit better in its aims. I don't feel like it got an awful lot of character out of this character study, which is effectively what it is. So
yeah. I mean, again, worth watching for Jamie Bell's performance alone. I mean, it shines a wee bit of a light on these groups, I guess, but nothing like enough.
Yeah, it's not really telling you anything you didn't already know. Presumably, as long as you're not a total nutcase, you probably realise that already. Neo-Nazis, white supremacists, probably a bad thing. It doesn't really give you a lot more detail than that in terms of moral lessons, and perhaps not really in terms of actually understanding any of the mindset of how they could come across to these beliefs or how you could get them out of these beliefs. So yeah, it's more just a sort of general warning of the kind of dangers of it, rather than any kind of actual actionable use that you advice that could be used in the modern context. But it was a diverting enough film for the time I was with it. But yeah, I really wanted a bit more out of this. It felt like it could have been a really good film, but it's instead a whole level below American History X in terms of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was very much American History X is the better film. I think perhaps the depressing thing coming out of it is, like 20 years, things don't appear to have changed an awful lot.
Yeah.
If they have, it's probably for the worse.
Yes, we've never quite been the post-racial society that perhaps the Obama election, the more optimistic thought might usher in, but yes, certainly it's got markedly worse in recent years, so if nothing else, we need to keep bringing up these films and these points as a combat to that, but yeah, it really deserved a bit better.